So think about the physical sensation you get when you're about to walk into a high-stakes job interview.
Oh, yeah. The sweaty palms.
Exactly. Your heart rate elevates, your palms sweat, and your brain suddenly feels like it's, I don't know, operating on dial-up internet.
Like it just completely freezes up on you.
Right. And you are entirely convinced that your professional worth is about to be judged on this strict binary scale of absolute perfection versus just total failure.
It's so true. We tend to treat everyday professional interactions as if like one stutter or one misplaced word will instantly disqualify us.
Yeah, and that intense pressure cooker environment is actually the focal point of today's deep dive. We're examining a story originally designed for B2 level English language learners.
Which is such an interesting lens for this topic.
It really is. The story follows a 27-year-old guy named Michael. He's got a degree in business administration, 2 years of experience as a sales assistant, and he has just landed this massive interview for a marketing coordinator role at an international company.
And, the premise of the source material is explicitly about navigating this high-pressure scenario in a second language, which obviously adds a really distinct layer of vulnerability.
Oh, for sure.
But the underlying mechanics of what Michael experiences and the strategies he uses to ultimately succeed, well, they are universally applicable to anyone listening to this right now.
Totally. So our mission today is to extract those core mechanics of successful communication under pressure.
Right, looking past just the language learning aspect.
Exactly. We want to uncover the neurobiology of performance anxiety, the pervasive myth that you need to be flawless to be competent, and honestly, the sheer pragmatic power of authenticity.
Because whether you are prepping for a major career transition, pitching a new client, or, just trying to survive the daily gauntlet of corporate communication, Michael's journey provides this really fascinating blueprint.
It really does. So let's start by establishing Michael's baseline psychological state as the interview approaches.
It's not great.
No, it's not. Despite having the right qualifications and a solid track record in sales, his anxiety is just entirely hijacking his prefrontal cortex. The source material details this internal monologue that is essentially like a highlight reel of catastrophic thinking.
Yeah, his brain is just spiraling.
Okay, let's unpack this. He is sitting there running through this barrage of what-ifs. He's thinking, what if... I forget the right words. What if I make grammar mistakes? What if I don't understand the interviewer's question?
It's panic mode.
Total panic. He is treating this conversation like a rigid academic exam, where the interviewer is just waiting to deduct points for every misplaced preposition. And, I find it fascinating how we naturally conflate linguistic perfection or just having a highly polished presentation with actual underlying professional competence.
Right, like if we stumble, we're suddenly bad at our jobs.
Yes. We just assume that if we don't sound like a slick corporate brochure, we won't be perceived as capable. It's like we think it's a spelling bee instead of a conversation between future colleagues.
And what's fascinating here is that this response, it's actually deeply rooted in our evolutionary psychology.
Oh, wait, really? How so?
Well, think about it. An interview is a highly consequential but totally uncontrollable environment.
Yeah.
You cannot predict the exact questions they'll ask, so your brain desperately latches onto the variables you think you can control.
Like having perfect grammar.
Exactly, perfect grammar, or rehearsing a very specific polished sentence over and over. But the turning point in our source material happens when Michael visits a bookstore. He picks up a copy of a book called Knock 'em Dead Job Interview by Martin Yate.
Okay.
And the core insight he pulls from this book fundamentally dismantles that whole academic exam mentality. He realizes that interviewers are not out there hunting for a flawless orator.
Right. They aren't hiring a public speaker.
Exactly. They are looking for problem solvers. They want clear communicators and resilient team players.
That is such a massive shift. It changes the entire objective from performing to actually connecting.
It completely flips the script.
Yeah. Because if the interviewer is looking for a problem solver, then, the momentary struggle to find the right word isn't a failure. It's actually a real-time demonstration of how you handle friction.
Precisely. You stop trying to be a perfect robot and you start showing them how you navigate being a competent human.
Which is so much more valuable. And that realization is the catalyst that moves Michael out of that state of amygdala-driven panic and into productive preparation.
Yeah, he finally understands that his ability to project confidence and build a rapport will carry way more weight than having, an encyclopedic vocabulary.
Which transitions us beautifully into the architecture of his preparation.
Yeah.
Because, knowing that perfection is a myth is great theory, but you still have to put in the practical work to actually rewire your brain's default panic response.
Right. Theory only gets you so far.
Exactly. So Michael starts by addressing the physical reality of communication. The source notes that he studies Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which directs his attention to nonverbal cues.
The physical stuff.
Yeah. He actively practices making eye contact, demonstrating genuine interest, and just smiling naturally. And I imagine this isn't just about looking approachable to the interviewer.
No, not at all.
Like physically practicing a relaxed smile and steady eye contact probably activates the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
Right? It signals to his own brain that he is safe, that he's not under attack.
You are hitting on a really crucial biofeedback loop there. By consciously regulating his physical posture and his facial expressions, he is actively downregulating his own stress hormones.
It's like hacking his own nervous system.
It really is. But he doesn't ignore the verbal component either. He just approaches it differently. He starts engaging in low-stakes immersion.
Like what? What does he do?
Well, every morning he listens to an English podcast to practice useful phrasing aloud. And he studies a book called English Vocabulary in Use to Internalize High-Impact Concepts. Words like initiative, adaptability, collaboration, leadership, and problem-solving.
Okay, I do want to push back on this specific part of his strategy.
True.
Okay, let's hear it. If Michael is drilling a vocabulary book and repeating podcast phrases on his morning commute, isn't there a huge risk that he's just swapping his grammar perfectionism for vocabulary memorization?
I see what you're saying.
Like, it seems to me that memorizing corporate buzzwords could make him sound incredibly robotic, kind of like an actor awkwardly waiting for their exact cue to drop the word synergy into a sentence.
Yeah, that is a very common trap, and honestly, it's where a lot of candidates totally freeze up. But the source text makes a really distinct point of clarifying his methodology here.
How so?
Michael is deliberately practicing using these words naturally. He isn't memorizing dictionary definitions or drafting long, rigid speeches about, a time he showed leadership.
Oh, I see. That kind of mirrors how jazz musicians practice.
What do you mean?
Well, they don't memorize the exact sequence of notes for a solo they're going to play next week. They practice the scales relentlessly so that when they are on stage and the music shifts unexpectedly, they have the raw materials to improvise.
Right.
They're building a toolkit. They're not writing a script.
That is the perfect distinction. To use a geographic analogy, it's like the difference between memorizing turn-by-turn directions to a specific restaurant versus taking the time to actually learn your way around the neighborhood.
Oh, like that.
If a road is closed, the person with the rigid turn-by-turn directions just completely panics. They're lost. But the person who knows the neighborhood, they simply take a different street.
They just read around it.
Exactly. Michael is familiarizing himself with his professional neighborhood by making sure concepts like collaboration are easily accessible in his working memory. He can navigate toward them naturally whenever a relevant topic arises.
That makes a lot of sense. But, knowing the neighborhood conceptually is one thing. You still actually have to drive the car.
True.
Theory is absolutely useless without application.
Which brings us to the crucible of his preparation, which is the mock interview with his friend Emma.
Yes, the stress test.
Right. This part of the narrative really highlights the necessity of external feedback because his first attempt at answering questions is understandably pretty rough. Yeah, the mock interview serves as a stress test for that newly built toolkit. Emma opens with probably the most notoriously open-ended question in the corporate world. Tell me about yourself.
The absolute worst question.
It really is. And Michael's initial instinct is to ramble. He completely over-explains.
But Emma gives him incredibly pragmatic feedback. She tells him to keep it clear and relevant. And this forces Michael to distill his entire sprawling background into a punchy synthesis and summary.
He has to edit himself.
Exactly. So he states his name, his 2 years of grounding in sales, his capacity for teamwork, and his specific ambition to transition into marketing at an international level.
That is so much better.
It instantly transforms a sprawling biography into a highly targeted value proposition.
And he applies that same rigorous editing to the dreaded weakness question, too.
Oh, how does he handle that one? That's always tricky.
Well, rather than offering a thinly veiled brag like, oh, I'm such a perfectionist, or, oversharing some genuine disqualifier, he finds the strategic middle ground. He admits that early in his career, he really struggled with delegating tasks. But then he immediately pivots to the actionable steps he is taking right now to build trust and improve his collaboration with teammates.
Wow, that shows like a ton of self-awareness and a really proactive growth mindset.
It really does.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When they practice behavioral questions, like describing a past challenge, Michael employs the STAR method.
Right, the classic STAR method.
Now, I know anyone listening to this who was prepped for an interview in the last decade is super familiar with situation, task, action, result. It's practically industry standard at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
He uses it to frame a story about handling an urgent customer complaint. He lays out the angry client, his action of working with the manager, and the result of retaining the business. But I hypothesize that for Michael, leaning on an acronym like STAR isn't just about telling a good story.
What do you think it's about then?
I think it's about neurobiology. Like, I imagine that having a predetermined structural framework actively offloads the mental processing required to communicate under that kind of pressure.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are basically describing the exact mechanics of cognitive load theory.
Okay, cognitive load theory.
Yeah, so human working memory, which is essentially our brain's RAM, has a very strictly limited capacity.
Right, it can only hold so much data at once.
Exactly. So when you are sitting in a high-stakes interview, your cognitive load is already practically maxed out just processing the environment and managing your baseline anxiety.
You're running hot.
Yes. If you are simultaneously trying to invent a narrative structure and remember the sequence of events and ensure you are answering the prompt and then translate all of that into a second language or polished corporate phrasing, you overload the system.
A brain crashes.
It effectively crashes. You end up stuttering, you freeze, or you just ramble.
Because the basic scaffolding of the conversation is taking up all the energy that should be going into the actual connection with the interviewer.
Precisely. The STAR method acts as external scaffolding. Because Michael knows the inherent shape of his answer, like he knows he simply has to hit those 4 structural beats. He doesn't have to expend precious mental energy organizing his thoughts on the fly.
The framework just holds the weight of the narrative for it.
Exactly. This dramatically reduces his cognitive load. It frees up his mental RAM to focus on the nuance of his vocabulary, his tone of voice, his pacing, and, maintaining that steady eye contact we discussed earlier.
It also ensures that his answers are doing multiple jobs at once. The source notes that when Emma asks, "Why do you want to work here?" Michael explicitly mentions the company's reputation for innovation and customer satisfaction.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah. Because his cognitive load is managed, he has the bandwidth to strategically weave his company research into his response, which proves his alignment with their specific values. He has built this incredibly sturdy yet flexible foundation.
He really has.
But, as we all know, a mock interview in your living room with a friend is a very controlled environment.
Yes, it is.
The true test of these mechanics only happens when the variables become unpredictable.
Which brings us to the actual day of the interview. This is where all that theoretical preparation finally collides with reality.
The source material acknowledges that Michael is nervous, which, is the appropriate physiological response. But he leans heavily on the architecture he built. He executes those nonverbal cues. He greets the interviewer warmly, he smiles to regulate his nervous system, and he listens intently.
And then the exact nightmare scenario happens.
Yes, the scenario that fueled his anxiety at the very beginning of the story actually materializes. The interviewer asks a question, and Michael realizes he does not fully understand what is being asked.
This is it. This is the ultimate stress test of his entire paradigm shift. He is face-to-face with the exact what-if that was keeping him awake at night.
And the overwhelming instinct in a moment like this, for almost everyone, is self-preservation through masking.
Oh, absolutely.
You just want to nod, pick out the 1 or 2 words you did comprehend, and just start talking, desperately hoping you stumble into an acceptable answer.
Fake it till you make it. Right.
Exactly. Because when you are already hyper-aware of your language skills, pausing to ask a clarifying question feels like holding up a giant neon sign that says, "I am incompetent." You fear that asking for help shatters the illusion of perfection.
But Michael completely resists that instinct.
He does. Instead of faking it, he maintains his composure and simply says, "I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?" He directly asks for clarification.
Which is so brave.
It is. And according to the source, this doesn't count against him at all. The interviewer actively appreciates his honesty and his professionalism. And, well, Fast forward a bit, and Michael actually receives the job offer.
Amazing.
Yeah, his new manager specifically highlights his positive attitude, his clear communication, and his willingness to learn. But let's dig into the mechanism of why this actually worked.
Yeah, let's break that down.
Because why would a hiring manager who is evaluating someone's communication skills actually be impressed by a candidate halting the interview to admit they didn't understand?
It's a great point, and it raises an important question about the actual pragmatic values of a functional workplace and how that contrasts sharply with the performative values we think are expected of us.
Okay, there's more about that.
Well, to understand why the manager liked this, we just have to evaluate the alternative. If Michael had masked his confusion, guessed at the meaning, and then provided a totally irrelevant answer, what data does that actually give the hiring manager?
It signals that when Michael is unsure, his priority is protecting his own ego rather than actually achieving clarity.
Exactly.
It is the manager that he's a liability.
Exactly. In a real-world business context, imagine he is managing a critical marketing campaign with a massive budget. That specific behavioral trait is disastrous.
Oh, it would be terrible.
If you give a directive and your coordinator fakes understanding just to save face, they're going to execute the wrong strategy, waste capital, and create massive downstream problems. A functional business doesn't need employees who pretend to know everything.
Right.
It needs employees who know how to identify their own blind spots and who will actively seek the information required to do the job correctly.
That makes total sense. We often think the interview is a test of our knowledge, but it's actually an audition for how we handle being part of a team.
That's a great way to put it.
By asking for the question to be repeated, Michael provides empirical evidence of his professional maturity. He proves that he values true understanding and accurate execution far more than the appearance of perfection.
And it is a profound display of confidence, really.
Yeah, because you have to be deeply secure in your baseline competence to comfortably admit a momentary gap in comprehension like that.
It completely validates the initial thesis he learned from Martin Yates' book. The hiring manager wasn't evaluating Michael against a rubric of flawless grammar or robotic delivery.
They wanted a human.
They were evaluating his authenticity, his honesty, and his ability to navigate a moment of friction with grace. Clear, honest communication, even when it involves admitting a deficit, will systematically outperform flawless but shallow execution every single time.
It completely reframes the entire concept of professional communication. He secured a highly competitive role, not because he scrubbed away all of his imperfections, but because he demonstrated exactly how he manages them.
Exactly.
So, for you listening to this, whether you have a major interview on the horizon, a big client presentation, or you are just trying to be heard in your weekly team meetings, let's distill the mechanics of Michael's approach so you can deploy them yourself.
The takeaways.
Yeah, first, shift your preparation from scripting to tool building. Don't memorize monologues. Instead, familiarize yourself with your professional neighborhood. Internalize the concepts and the vocabulary that matter, but leave yourself the flexibility to navigate naturally.
That flexibility is key.
Second, consciously manage your cognitive load. Utilize established frameworks like the STAR method, not just to tell better stories, but to act as external scaffolding for your brain. By offloading that structural work, you free up the mental bandwidth required to actively listen, maintain regulating nonverbal cues, and actually connect with the person across the table.
Beautifully said.
And finally, you have to genuinely internalize the reality that perfection is a myth that actively works against you. The people evaluating you are looking for competent humans, not infallible robots.
Be a human.
Yes. Prioritize true understanding over the appearance of knowing it all. If you miss something, just ask for clarification. Showing up as your authentic self, equipped with preparation but entirely comfortable with your own vulnerability, is frankly the most powerful communication strategy you can employ.
And this entire exploration leaves us with a rather profound implication to consider regarding the environments we work in every single day.
Oh, where are we going with this?
Well, we've analyzed how Michael's commitment to authentic, imperfect communication, prioritizing clarity over ego, won him the job in a high-stakes scenario.
Right.
But what happens after the onboarding process is over? If we definitively know that hiring managers and leaders prioritize clear problem solving and honesty over highly polished, flawless rhetoric in the interview room, How might that reality change the way we evaluate our peers in everyday corporate culture?
No, that's a really good question.
Could systematically embracing imperfect communication in our daily stand-ups and strategy meetings actually strip away the layers of dense corporate jargon and posturing we all tend to hide behind?
It's entirely possible.
Right. If an entire organization stopped trying to sound flawlessly professional and instead prioritized the kind of raw, true understanding Michael demonstrated when he simply asked them to repeat the question, could that lead to more honest, highly innovative, and deeply functional teams?
I mean, I think it would.
It is absolutely worth pondering how adopting the Michael approach could revolutionize not just how we survive the hiring process, but how we fundamentally rethink collaboration once we are finally through the door.